What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. We are back with my preseason contender tiers. Today we are going to talk about tier 9. So I'll get into what that tier entails and we'll go from there. Again, this is one of 6 episodes that I'm going to be doing, diving into all 30 teams, ranking them 30 through 1 and tiering them off into 10 separate groups. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So today with tier 9, we have the group I'm calling No Man's Land because these teams really do not have a clear direction. You know, they are not quite bad enough to be a bottom feeder, tank to the end of the season, get a top 3 pick, or at least top 3 odds, I'll say, because, you know, these days the lottery has been kind to the teams with lesser odds in it with the flattened odds that they've had over the past few seasons. But regardless, they're not bad enough to be, 15, 20 win team or anything like that. But they also are just not good enough to be a surefire playoff team. And in a lot of cases, maybe not even good enough to be a play-in team. All of these teams, for some reason or another, seem to want to push their chips in to make a playoff push when maybe they shouldn't. But the chips that they have drawn for themselves are just not going to be good enough. You know, this group of teams is likely going to be hovering around 500, in some cases even below that. But the harsh reality that they just either don't want to accept or in some cases have their hands tied due to previous transactions they've made where maybe they don't own their pick, so bottoming out is not really an incentive for them. And so they're kind of just going for it and seeing what happens, but the direction still remains unclear for those teams. So we have 6 teams in this tier. Starting off with number 26, we have the Chicago Bulls. And I'm sure it's no surprise to hear the Bulls in this tier. Every time I've done one of these tiers, I do a group that is somewhat similar to this. I think in the past I've called them directionless teams, which is equally as fitting a name for this group. This year called them No Man's Land. But the Bulls have firmly been in this general tier, whatever we want to call it, for a handful of seasons now. You know, since they traded away Jimmy Butler back in 2018, this team has been just stuck in mediocrity. You know, they did bottom out a little bit 2019, 2020. They had 22 wins in back-to-back seasons. But since then, 31 wins, 46 wins, 40 wins, 39 wins, 39 wins. So the past 3 seasons have really been stuck right around 500. And the only decent season they had was back in 2022 after they made the trade for DeMar DeRozan, when they had Levine and Lonzo Ball and Nikola Vucevic. And for about half a season, they looked pretty good. You know, I was still very skeptical that they were legitimate contenders back then either. But the point is, since then, they've just been stuck in the middle. And they can't seem to get out of it no matter what they do. They at least finally I'll give them some credit for finally moving off some of their veterans. DeMar DeRozan, they traded last offseason in a sign and trade to Sacramento. Zach LaVine, they traded at the deadline last year. Lonzo Ball, they moved this offseason. But the problem is they spent a bit of a premium to get a lot of those guys, you know, giving up a first-round pick to sign and trade DeRozan. Giving up Jimmy Butler in what got them back Zach LaVine in that case, you know, Nikola Vucevic. They gave up multiple first-round picks that ended up turning into Franz Wagner, among other pieces for the Magic. And then Alonzo Ball's sake, again, they gave up draft assets to get him from New Orleans. But in return for all these guys, they didn't nearly replicate the returns. The Zach LaVine trade, they get back a bunch of not so good contracts. You know, they get the protection lifted off their first round pick last year, which was going to convey anyway. So no real draft capital to speak of there. DeMar DeRozan, same sort of thing, you know, some second round picks, but not much back in return for him. Lonzo Ball, they flip him for Isaac Okoro this offseason. Don't really understand that move at all. I think Okoro is a much worse player than Lonzo Ball, and I think that Okoro is a terrible fit for this Bulls team anyway. He's kind of just a smaller, slightly try harder version of Patrick Williams, who has also been terrible for the Bulls over the past few seasons since they paid him that big deal. And so while I understand the intention behind a lot of these moves, I just don't feel like they've gotten good value for a lot of them. The only one I will defend is the Alex Caruso for Giddey move. This was a trade that I defended at the time, despite perhaps being in the minority there. I think that is a move you make 10 out of 10 times if you're Chicago. A lot of people thought they should have got draft capital back, but in my opinion, Giddey is a superior player to Caruso now. And even if you think Caruso is a little bit better, I can at least hear the argument for it. It's marginal at best. But when you consider that Giddey is, almost a decade younger, still not even 23 years old heading into this season. I think he turns 23 in a couple days here, but Caruso is into his 30s, been injury prone, etc. So the age gap there and just potential moving forward makes a huge difference in terms of value for the two players. So I actually thought that was a very good deal. They also re-signed Josh Giddey in restricted free agency this offseason to a 4-year, $100 million deal, which I honestly thought was pretty fair value across the board. Giddey put together a career year for all intents and purposes and was tremendous for them down the stretch last year. I think he averaged close to a 20-point triple-double in post All-Star break last year. He shot a career high from three-point range on the highest volume of his career high in assists, career high in rebounds. He, basically dictated this entire offense and it was the primary initiator for this team that, again, was not very good, but a team that was desperate for that kind of skill set on the roster and has not had it really in the past. But for the Bulls this upcoming year, they probably are going to go as Josh Giddey goes. As I said, I'm a Giddey defender. I think that he can be a solid contributor on a winning team. And I just think that the skill set that he has at his size, 6'8", with the unique ability as a playmaker and initiator offensively is very unique. And it's rare in today's NBA, and it's a highly commoditized skill. I know the shooting has been inconsistent, and 37% last year is pretty good, but a lot of those are wide open looks. People are going under screens on him. So it's hard to fully trust that as like, okay, he's just a good shooter now. And I know the defense has not been very good for him either, which are two very important parts of the modern NBA, playing defense and shooting from deep. But I just feel like his skill set's so unique. The stuff he does do is highly, highly valuable to a basketball team in the NBA. And so this idea that he can't fit on a winning basketball team, I just don't really buy that. I thought the situation in OKC was not a very good fit. And I do think that if you want to build around Giddey, which it appears they intend to, you do have to kind of cater the roster to him a little bit. And that's another reason why I think the Bulls are in no man's land, because I don't think that this roster is catered to fit Josh Giddey at all. If you look at a lot of the role players down this roster, you've got Trey Jones, not a very good shooter. Isaac Okoro, not a very good shooter. Ayo Dosunmu, probably league average at best. Patrick Williams, not a very good shooter. Matas Buzelis, not a very good shooter. So they just have a lot of non-shooters that they're putting next to this guy. And so the spacing is going to be clunky. It's going to put a real cap on what they can be offensively. And I already mentioned Giddey's shortcomings on the defensive end. They also don't really have the defensive personnel to be able to compensate for some of his limitations there. So not a very strong roster across the board. The other biggest key pieces that they do have are Vucevic, who I thought they should have tried to trade at the deadline last year. I think they did. They tried to get a first-round pick. Just wasn't going to happen. But he is in his mid-30s at this point. He's coming off one of his better seasons in the past few years. So I would have just cut my losses, gotten what you could for him, went with a full youth movement, played some of the younger guys at the big spot. But they did what they've continued to do, hold on to a lot of these guys just a little bit too long, like they did with Levine and Lonzo and DeRozan. Then there's Kobe White, who will be due up for a new contract soon. I like Kobe White to an extent. I kind of feel like he is destined to be more of a combo guard, sixth man off the bench, spark plug scorer, because he's not a very good defender. He does not have the natural ability as sort of a lead guard, as a playmaker, creator for other players on the court. And his skill set's a little bit better suited as sort of a shooting guard, if you will, but he's not really built like one. He's frail and he doesn't have a ton of size at that position. So I don't really know what his destiny is. I've been saying this a lot for these combo undersized guards that can score a lot but don't play a lot of defense. I really just think that archetype of player, you have to be like a really, really special offensive player to be able to be more than just what I think is probably a first guard off the bench. And they exist out there. Donovan Mitchell's only 6'3", Tyrese Maxey's around that height as well. Like, those guys are so special offensively that they kind of transcend that archetype in general. But Kobe White certainly is not in that same category of player. So if I were them, I would probably trade Kobe White. I know he's still in his mid-20s, but he's a 20-plus point per game scorer. He's shown flashes offensively of, being a really good shooter from outside. He can pass the ball a little bit, even though it's not his first instinct there. And so I do think they could probably get a first-round pick, if not maybe two friends, depending on how desperate a team was. But knowing the Bulls, they probably won't do that. They'll probably either hold on to him and overpay him in restricted free agency and lock him and Giddey into this backcourt that's probably not ever going to develop into anything with the pieces they have around them. And to me, even though Kobe White is still young overall, like, he's 25, he'll be 26 by the end of the season, which isn't old. But like Giddey, again, he's still 22 as I'm recording this right now. So he is closer to the timeline of a Buzelis or a Noah Senge, who they took in the draft this past season. So I do think you can build around Giddey with the younger guys, whereas Kobe White, he's essentially approaching his prime and going to be paid probably more than he should. So I would move off of him. I would move off of Vucevic, but they're the Bulls. I doubt they will do it. And the only chance they really have of ascending to something better than what we've seen over the last few seasons is if Buzelis develops into a star level player for this team, which I had mixed feelings about him coming out of the draft. I thought that his, athleticism, defensive potential, some of the ability he displayed as a scorer were all impressive. He's still raw. If he's not going to be shooting threes at a consistent clip, then it's going to be hard for him to stick as a high level starter in the NBA. But he showed a lot of flashes last year. So I'm relatively optimistic about what he can be. I think a core of him, Giddey, and whoever they draft over the next few years could be somewhat interesting. I'm not a big Asenge fan who they took this year. I think he's extremely, extremely raw. And if you're going to take a prospect like that, then why are you holding on to Vucevic? Why are you holding on to Kobe White? And so the Bulls are a team that is difficult to understand their thought process. They have been over the past few seasons. I think they probably peak out as a play-in team this coming season, which it seems like that is something they are very comfortable with being, as they have been for 3 straight years now. So we'll see with the Bulls, but not super optimistic on them. Up next at number 25, we have the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix made a massive move this offseason in trading away Kevin Durant, which largely had a lot to do with the fact that they were pretty strapped flexibility-wise. They were a second apron team, the most expensive team in the NBA this past season. And they needed to get under the apron to, one, not have their draft pick kicked to the end of the first round 7 years down the line with the new rule with the CBA there. But two, just to be able to have some flexibility with this roster. They couldn't aggregate salaries. They couldn't sign anybody except to a minimum deal. And so it was really strapping them to be able to make any moves. And last year was a complete disaster. They won only 36 games. When Kevin Durant played, they weren't very good. When Devin Booker played, they weren't very good. It didn't matter who played. They were just a bad basketball team. They were in the bottom 5 in the NBA in terms of defense. Coach Budenholzer had very clearly lost the locker room. And so there really wasn't almost anything that went right for this team. So I don't know how they could have possibly went into next season thinking, well, we'll just run this thing back. I mean, they're going to be on their 4th coach in 4 seasons, which is pretty unheard of in general. And on top of the Durant situation, the Bradley Beal situation had reached sort of an impasse. He was getting paid, obviously, a ridiculous amount of money and not living up to that standard with his play on the court. He did post some of the most efficient seasons of his career in Phoenix, but it was obviously in a more limited role. And when you're primarily a scorer and that part of your game gets a little bit minimized with your role, you kind of have to do other things on the court to be able to maintain the same level of value. And he just wasn't doing that. He wasn't playing defense how they needed him to. He wasn't doing the little things on the court. And so it was hard to justify bringing him back, especially when you consider the construction of this roster. Devin Booker obviously is their best player. He has been a little bit of a combo guard over the last few seasons, playing some point guard here and there, and probably will have a lot of those responsibilities this season as well. But he is primarily shooting guard throughout his career. Then Bradley Beal, obviously a shooting guard as well. Then Jalen Green, a part of the Kevin Durant trade, also a shooting guard. So you really couldn't have your three best players all play the exact same position, all around the same size, all around the same skill set. So if they intended to hold on to Jalen Green, which it obviously looks like they do intend to do so, at least for this season, then it was just going to be really hard to envision all three of those guys being on the same team together when they have relatively redundant skill sets and play the exact same position. I don't know how you're playing all three of those guys at the same time. But this roster, it is a makeshift group, obviously. Aside from trading Durant, they got Jalen Green in that trade, like I mentioned. They also had Dillon Brooks. They got the 10th pick, which they used on Kaman Malawach, someone I'm very high on, but probably is not going to be ready to be a big contributor in the first couple of years in the NBA, which they addressed their center position in other ways. So I don't know if they're going to necessarily need him to be that. But yeah, they trade for Mark Williams on draft night. They still have Nick Richards, who they added last year during the deadline. And outside of that, they mostly added around the fringes. They brought back Colin Gillespie, bring in Jordan Goodwin, Jared Butler. They signed Nigel Hayes-Davis from overseas, hoping he could maybe be this year's Yabusele, who obviously had a really nice year as a role player for the Sixers last year, now with the Knicks. But this roster, I don't hate all the moves they made in a vacuum. Like I like Mark Williams. I've been on here on my podcast talking about him ever since he was with the Hornets and then was going to go to the Lakers and then was not with the Lakers and then now gets straight to the Suns. Like I think he's still incredibly young in his very early 20s. He's been super injury prone. I know that, but he's been a really productive player when he has played. I think the defensive potential is there, even though the results haven't necessarily been there. But he's a massive dude. He's the type of rim runner and lob threat that Jalen Green and Devin Booker have both not had on their teams over the past few years. And he's a really good offensive rebounder as well. So I like the Mark Williams addition. I think Dillon Brooks is the exact kind of guy that this team needs. They have just been abysmal defensively over the last season, and they didn't have a lot of guys that just give a shit on that end of the court and that are going to get in people's grills and be annoying and disruptive. And that is Dillon Brooks to a T. He's also a pretty good three-point shooter, gives them a little bit more positional size at the small forward position, which they also really lacked last year. So, adding those guys, I don't hate it in a vacuum, but this roster is still just so imbalanced across the board positionally. Like, I think they have enough talent where if the pieces made sense next to each other, I think there's a chance they could be better than people think they could be. Or you can sometimes get away with a positionally imbalanced team if you are super, super talented. But this team's not. Devin Booker is probably still a top 15 player in the league in my eyes. By far the best player we've talked about in these tiers so far. But outside of him, the offensive creation is going to be hard to come by for this group. But positionally, like I said, they're pretty much covered at the center position. Williams, Nick Richards, Oso Gadara actually gave him some good minutes last year. Malawach, as I mentioned. And then they have a million shooting guards. Devin Booker, Grayson Allen, Jalen Green. Royce O'Neal's not really a shooting guard, but he's still only 6'4". Jared Butler's more of a combo guard. Jordan Goodwin's more of an off guard. Kobe Brea, who they drafted in the second round, like they have a million guards that are off ball typically. And then they don't have a point guard on the roster outside of Gillespie, if you want to call him that, but he's very unproven despite some people being high on him. And then at the wing position, they are crazy undersized. They've got Ryan Dunn. They've got Dillon Brooks. Outside of that, Royce O'Neal, 6'4". Like they do not have a legitimate rotation player from the height 6'7" all the way up to 6'9", which is like they're going to be massively undersized unless they play two bigs, which I would not recommend for this team, given the offensive and spacing issues they might already have. Look, could Rasheer Fleming turn into a useful piece as a second rounder this year? Maybe, but that is not something I think they should be banking on. Could Nigel Hayes Davis turn into the next Yabusele or come over here and just be a really good 3-and-D wing player? It's also possible, but I think that is something that's not realistic to bank on going into the year. So unless either of those guys turn into something significant, they don't have any size on the wing. And because Dylan Brooks is 6'6", Ryan Dunn is 6'6", they just don't have any size. They don't have a real power forward on the team. They don't have a real point guard on the team. So their team is just so positionally imbalanced. They've got too many redundant skill sets. They've got guys who probably aren't going to be able to play super well together. They'll be either conceding something on offense with spacing or conceding something on defense with size. And so it's a hodgepodge group. There is some talent there, but overall, I just don't see the vision of the cohesiveness of a team, which is a shame because this is a group that you would hope that they learn their lesson on that front in terms of they should be prioritizing more fit of players rather than necessarily just talent, which is what they've been mostly prioritizing the past few seasons. So I know it's not totally their fault. There's only so much they could do to get out of the hole they had kind of dug themselves in. And maybe one more transaction cycle helps them balance out the roster a little bit more. But aside from just that, I think defensively, I could see them being a little better than they were last year, just because having Ryan Dunn and Dylan Brooks out there, that's 2+ defenders out on the wing. I think they have a lot more size and at least theoretical defensive prowess at the center position than last year with Mark Williams and Malawach and Nick Richards. They at least have options there. But on the offensive end, I just think it's going to be a real struggle because if you've listened to this podcast, you know I am just not a Jalen Green believer. He is an inefficient player that takes bad shots, that doesn't make the shots that he takes at a high enough clip, and he's just wildly inconsistent. Sure, 1 out of 6 games he'll drop 37 on you, but the playoffs last year was just a perfect example. 38 points in game 2. Outside of that, 7 in game 1, 9 in game 3, 8 in game 4, 11 in game 5, 12 in game 6, and 8 in game 7. I mean, he was a complete dud. And it's not like Golden State had all these perimeter stoppers at the guard position to throw at him. I mean, there was instances where Steph Curry's on him and he couldn't get off a good look or take advantage of it. So for a guy who's supposed to be like a scorer, like that's his thing, he just doesn't do it at an effective or efficient enough rate for me to have any belief in him, even though he is still a very, very young player. And of course, there is some thought process that Devin Booker is by far the best player he's ever played with, especially on the offensive end. And so maybe that will take some pressure off. It's the first time in his career he's legitimately the clear-cut number 2 option offensively. Maybe that'll help, but I'm just skeptical. We just saw Bradley Beal and Booker not work together offensively. I don't see why Jalen Green and him would be any better of a fit. Green is a better athlete, gets downhill a little bit better, but again, he's not a really good finisher when he gets down to the basket. So I need to see it from Jalen Green before I'm really ever going to be bought in on him. And outside of him, next to Booker, there's just very, very little offensive creation on this team. It's a lot of role players that need guards to get them the ball in their spots. And so I really think that, for example, if Booker were to miss 20 games, that's going to be a really, really rough 20 games. Like Jalen Green, we've seen him be the number 1 scorer, but that was when he was backed by a top 5 defense in the league. That's when he was backed by a center who's one of the 5 best offensive hubs at his position in the NBA in Alperen Şengün. That's when he had a steady lead point guard next to him in Fred VanVleet, a freak athlete on the wing and Amen Thompson. Like he had a much better supporting cast next to him than he will in Phoenix if Booker is to miss time. So I don't see them being able to sustain any success if Booker, who hasn't been the most healthy over the past few seasons, it were to go down for even just a couple of weeks. So the Suns, do I think they're going to win 20, 25 games? No, I do think they have enough talent to be in the low 30s potentially, but they have dug themselves in a hole. I don't really know how they're going to get out of it. I'm still not in the trade Devin Booker camp just because maybe they get their picks back, but I don't think being in a scenario where you bottom out but don't have control over your picks is worth being. I think it's better off being kind of in the situation they're in right now. But hey, maybe they can do something in between where they trade Brooks for some draft capital or are able to flip Royce O'Neal, Grayson Allen. Like they have tradable options that maybe they can recoup some of their assets a little bit. And then who knows if I think their best bet to like get into a more relevant situation is if one of those quote unquote stars becomes available, that's kind of lost favor in the league. Someone like a LaMelo Ball, a Trae Young, a Zion Williamson. I don't know if Phoenix has the assets to get those guys, but I could see them not having a huge market. We've already seen rumors of Trae being floated out and nobody really wanting to pay him. LaMelo is still very unproven from a winning and impact standpoint, despite his stats. Zion, his health has been a major issue and his conditioning, etc. All that's well documented. So that type of player, were they to come available, maybe Phoenix has a chance to swing it just because the value is lower there. But unless they make some sort of swing like that, they're going to need to hit home runs on the fringes of this roster with some of their draft picks that they aren't going to have high picks with, and some of the fringe players maybe they add in free agency. But we'll see. This could be a rough season for Phoenix. But to be honest, I think it can't get worse than last year because at least this year the expectations are not there along with the disappointment. Up next in the no man's land tier at number 24, we have the New Orleans Pelicans, who are probably one of the more talented teams in this tier in terms of just sheer amount of talent they have. I think Zion, outside of Booker, is by far the best player within this tier. I think that at his ceiling, he still can be a borderline top 15, top 20 guy in the league when he's at his best. We saw in the play-in game a couple of years ago before he went down late in the fourth quarter, he was just absolutely dominating the Lakers, was the best player on the court. And it's a shame we haven't really seen him in more of those high leverage situations because he thrives basically the one and only time he was in that situation. And so Zion paired with guys like Trey Murphy, who I personally am extremely, extremely high on. He had a career year last season, averaging 21 points a game, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. He maintained some good efficiency, came into the league as sort of a dead-eye shooter, which he's been a very, very good shooter in the NBA this far at 38% on pretty good volume. But he's proven to be much more than that. He can do a little bit with the ball. He is still a very good defender. He's an underrated athlete attacking the basket. So I'm super high on Trey Murphy. He's 25 years old, just about to enter into his prime. And I think that with increased responsibility, he can show off a little bit more of that repertoire. And I think as much as I have been a Brandon Ingram fan in general, more so than general consensus, I think it made sense to move off of him for the sole reason that Trey Murphy probably is ready for more of those elevated reps. I think a lot of people still like Herb Jones. He did have like a quietly very, very bad year last year. He only played 20 games, but shot 30.6% from deep after a breakout year the year before. So who knows, maybe that 40+% year from three that he did have was a bit of an outlier. But if he can't shoot the ball, he's already pretty limited offensively. But what he does on the defensive end is still highly valuable, and I think any team in the league would love to have a guy like him, and he's on a team-friendly contract as well. So those are kind of their core three guys, but they do have a hodgepodge of other pieces of talent on the team. DeJounte Murray still is a good player, in my opinion. I think he's been, unfortunately, kind of just put in a lot of situations that were not very good fits for him. He's a guy that kind of needs the ball in his hand. He keeps going to these teams that already have a lot of guys that need the ball in their hand. Trae Young in Atlanta last year with Ingram and McCollum and Zion on the Pelicans. But he tore his Achilles in the middle part of last year, so I'm not exactly sure when he's going to come back. Could come back by the end of the season, but it wouldn't shock me if he missed the majority, if not all of the season. But they trade CJ McCollum as well for Jordan Poole, who I've never been the biggest fan of, but he was a little bit better last year. I think some of the bad habits at least showed signs of him flipping those to an extent, but still pretty inefficient across the board. Not much of a pass first guy on the offensive end, despite being the lead guard in Washington over the past few seasons, and defensively doesn't provide much there. But obviously can go get you 30 points on any given night. They do have some holdover players from the past couple of years that are role guys. Jose Alvarado is a solid backup guard in the league at this point. Jordan Hawkins has shown some flashes as a 3-point shooter on the wing and in the backcourt. They add Kevon Looney as well to their center rotation with Ves Misi, who was one of the better surprises in the draft last year. I thought he really outperformed his draft slot and showed that he could potentially be a guy for them to build around on this team at the center position. Don't know if he's the best fit next to a Zion, for example, because it doesn't stretch the floor at all, but he was a good rebounder, a good shot blocker for a rookie coming in. And then they added Sadiq Bey as well, who's been super injured, but shown flashes throughout his career. But the other biggest adds they made were in the draft. They take Jeremiah Fears at the 7th overall pick in this past year's draft. I'm not the biggest Fears guy, but I understand the upside with him as a super speedy point guard that can get downhill to the basket, can pass a little bit, and just like an exciting player at the guard position, and more of a little bit more of a true point guard than some of the other guards they have on this team. Then they add Derek Queen as well, good passing, playmaking guy for his position, offensive hub a little bit, can rebound the ball pretty well, and was a really effective post scorer for Maryland last season. But there's a reason New Orleans is in this category, because for all the talent they have, I don't think any of it fits very well together at all. Poole, Murray, Fears, that's a lot of mouths to feed in the backcourt, and 3 guys that don't play a lot of defense at this point in their career. Fears, who was just an awful 3-point shooter in college. There's no real reason to think that he's going to pop as a outside shooter in the NBA, next to Poole, who can and will shoot it, but the percentages haven't been super kind to him. He's not really that good of a shooter. And DeJounte Murray, also a league average shooter at best. So that backcourt with those 3 guys all need the ball, all not very good shooters. Then you look at the front court spot, Derek Queen and Zion Williamson. They just invested a lot in Derek Queen. Okay, I know they only took him 14th overall, but that trade was incomprehensible. I mean, this team, they won 21 games last year. I know it was a lot of injuries for them, but they won 21 games last year. There's no real reason to think that that couldn't happen again. If Zion plays 30 games, which is completely in the realm of possibility, Murray's not back, then suddenly you've got Jordan Poole and Trey Murphy and a whole lot of not much else. So it's not inconceivable they could be comparably bad again, yet they trade away their first-round pick next season completely unprotected. A pick that was extremely valuable because not only was it their own pick, they also have a swap on that pick with Milwaukee if they want it, with all the Giannis rumors. Like, that pick is tremendously valuable right now. And so they gave up a lot to get Derek Queen to move up from the early 20s in the draft up to 14, along with that additional first round pick. So, but regardless of what they gave up for Queen, I don't know how him and Zion play together. They're very similar body types. They both have similar concerns in terms of track record with their conditioning and their weight a little bit. Derek Queen, he is a talented player in terms of his offensive ability with the ball in his hands, but he is a total zero defensively. He is not a rim protector. He's not going to be able to anchor a defense throughout his career. I feel pretty confident in saying that. So what does that leave him in terms of where his best position will be? Probably as a bigger, bulkier 4-man, but he doesn't shoot the ball either. So he'd be really hard to stick there offensively from a spacing perspective. And how does that fit next to Zion? Then are you playing Zion at the small forward position? That, again, really hurts your spacing and shooting. And Zion is already not a great defender of 4s, and he probably would be even a worse defender of 3s. So positionally, I don't see the fit there to invest that much draft capital and equity in a guy in Queen that just, it probably doesn't fit with your best player. Maybe that's a sign that they're ready to move off Zion. But again, if you're going to move off Zion, then you can't be training your first round pick next season. So they are just contradicting themselves left and right. They're trading for younger pieces in Poole and Derek Queen and moving off steady veterans like CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram, but then they're giving away their draft capital. So it's like, are you making the youth movement or are you not? Because if you are, there's just no reason to be trading away valuable assets like that when that pick could be a top 3 pick. It could be a top 3 pick legitimately. And this is a really strong draft next year, especially in the top 3 with the Banta, Boozer, and Peterson in the top 3. All 3 of those guys could be worthy of a number 1 pick in a normal NBA draft. So it's just, I don't get it. I don't get that trade. I don't get the Jordan Poole move. If you're going to draft fears, why are you trading for Jordan Poole? And if you're going to trade away picks, it signals that maybe you're a little bit more win now with Zion, but then why are you trading away Brandon Ingram for second round picks? So New Orleans, it is just a shame because I like a lot of the pieces. I love Trey Murphy as a player. I love Zion as a player. I really like Herb Jones as a devastating defensive player on the perimeter. I think DeJounte Murray could be a really good contributor in the right situation. Like I like a lot of what they have. The talent is there. And I really like Willie Green as a coach too. I think he's underrated. I think he's been dealt a bad deck with just the injuries on this team and the amount of turnover and the clunky fits roster wise. Again, none of this talent fits together. I just don't see it, especially in the Stack Western Conference. If Zion plays 75 games and is an all NBA level player this season, could they sneak into the plan or maybe even compete for a playoff spot? Sure. But the ceiling for that team, again, would be first round exit against one of the top teams in the West. So again, they're stuck in this sort of in-between mediocrity. Like, are they trying to win for the playoffs? Are they building for the future? It's not clear. And they're giving away assets to potentially improve the team down the road. And so I don't really know where they're going. Then up next at number 23, we have the Sacramento Kings, who have basically cemented themselves as the Chicago Bulls West, not only just because they have similarly been stuck in a mediocrity of competing for the plan every single season and not really choosing the direction that they want to go, but also because they've got Zach LaVine and they've got DeMar DeRozan and they've got Domantas Sabonis, who is basically a better version of what Nikola Vucevic was for Chicago. So this roster, similarly to New Orleans, I think there is a lot of talent. I am one of the stronger Domantas Sabonis defenders that you will find. I think his ability as a passer and offensive hub is immensely valuable and underrated at the center position. I think that if you have him on offense, the floor for where you'll be offensively is incredibly high, assuming you have the requisite shooting and scoring around him. I also think the ceiling is incredibly high because I think that he can unlock a lot of things as a playmaker for a team offensively. He's still probably the best rebounder in the NBA today, and he shot 41.7% from 3 last year on over 2 attempts. Not insane volume, but credit to the guy for realizing that he needs to be able to shoot to be able to maximize what he can be as a player, and he's worked at it and he's continued to improve there. So I love Sabonis as a player. Zach LaVine, I think, is still, I don't really know how to pin down him. Like, he's got one playoff appearance to his name, and it was an ugly appearance for him. So that does say something about a guy that is into his 30s this coming season. But it's hard to argue. I mean, he shot 50, 40, 80 last season, both with Chicago and Sacramento. So he's an incredibly efficient scorer and shooter. He can average 20 to 25 points per game. I think in theory, him and Sabonis could be a good combination. But a lot of the pieces around these guys just don't fit with those two. DeMar DeRozan, I feel bad for the guy because he hasn't really lost a step in terms of production. He still averaged 22 a game last year, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 48% from the field, one of the most clutch guys in the NBA. But we know that a guy who can't shoot, who doesn't play any defense, he's just going to have a hard time finding a role. And he might be best suited for a sixth man spark plug scorer off the bench at this point. And we also know that his fit next to a non-shooting center on volume, at least, next to Zach LaVine, who we already saw the proof of concept of those two players, and it was very your turn, my turn. So I just don't really know where he fits. He didn't really fit with De'Aaron Fox either, because Fox is not a phenomenal three-point shooter, more of a mid-range guy, a guy that gets to the basket. So the spacing for this team was just all off last year. And then they trade away Fox, LaVine, and a couple first-round picks they get back. And those three players are just not going to be good enough to be competitive in a Western Conference. They also just don't have the spacing they need. Sabonis not as much of a shooter. Like I said, DeRozan not a shooter at all. A lot of the role players aren't super good shooters as well. They got rid of probably the best shooter they had in the team in Kevin Huerter in the De'Aaron Fox deal as well. And it is a shame because I really do like a lot of the young talent on Sacramento. I was really high on Devin Carter coming out of last year's draft. He had a significant injury that totally derailed his rookie season, so I wouldn't put too much stake in the fact that he had pretty bad numbers last year. But I like him as a guy that can be a defensive, get in your grill, guard guys 94 feet on that end of the court, and he's an improved shooter and can do a little bit of creation on the offensive end as well. I really like Neat Clifford, who they took in the first round this year. I think he could be instantly a 3-and-D high-level contributor to even a winning team. I think he has the size, the shooting ability, the creation offensively to be able to do a little bit more than just be a stand-in-the-corner guy. He's also an elite rebounder for his position. And so I like what he is as a player as well. And then I think Keon Ellis probably should have gotten way more minutes for this team. They kind of have buried him a little bit on the bench, but he's by far the best perimeter defender that this team has, and they've just played much better with him on the court as well. So, but again, I don't know what they're trying to accomplish. This is a team that had, in my opinion, an outlier season a couple years ago when they won 48 games and were the 3 seed in the Western Conference. I said that after the season, I thought they'd have big regression. They followed it up with 46 wins, which is decent, but wasn't good enough to make the playoffs. They won 40 games last season. And I just feel like the Bulls, they are destined for another 37 to 41 win season. I just don't see a path for them in this loaded Western Conference. I've gone this far and I haven't even talked about their defense. I mean, Sabonis' shortcomings are well more documented on the defensive end as just not being able to be a defensive anchor for this team, not a rim protector, a guy who's been exposed and in the biggest moments in the play-in and the postseason, and just hasn't been the big man down low that they need on that end of the court. And then outside of him, who else is even defending on the team? LaVine doesn't put in much effort on the defensive end. DeRozan's a big minus on the defensive end of the court at this point. They did add Dennis Schroeder, and he will help with some of the ball handling duty and playmaking at the point guard position, but he's just like the last kind of point guard they need. Like, he is a guy that wants to get downhill to the basket, not a great three-point shooter, can live in the mid-range a little bit as well. It's like they have all these guys with these redundant skill sets that are not going to lend themselves to any sort of spacing. And I just don't understand the construction of this team with all these guys together. Probably the biggest thing to maybe be excited about this team is Keegan Murray, but even he has really stagnated over the past few seasons. You know, I was kind of lower on him coming into the NBA, but he had a really, really good rookie season. Then I was willing to concede that I was wrong on him and that he could be a really nice role player, a high-level starter. And then he bumped up a little bit of his responsibilities as his second season in the NBA. And then last year regressed a little bit. So I don't really know what to make of him. Sometimes he just kind of disappears on the court and it's just out there. So Murray just kind of feels like a guy that is decent at a lot of things, but not really great at anything. It just feels like he can't put it all together at once between being a good defensive player and stopper on that end of the court, also being a consistent shooter. He dabbles in both, but doesn't do either consistently, has rarely done both at the same time as well. So his value is kind of capped a little bit there. But ultimately, the Kings, I just think that they have inherent issues. We've seen what this looks like. We've seen it. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. We've seen DeRozan and Levine play together in multiple places, and it's just not good enough to be a playoff team. We've seen Sabonis without the defensive help on the perimeter or next to him down low, and it hasn't been good enough. So I don't really know what else this team like what they need to see to be able to pivot off of some of these things. Like they tried to add Kuminga. I think that would have been a terrible move for them. Add another guy that can't shoot, another guy that needs the ball, another guy that wants to operate in the mid range, another guy that's a ball stopper. Like it's just, I don't know. It feels like a fantasy team. I heard someone say, and I think I agree with that. So Sacramento, we'll see. Bulls West is what we're going to call them. But I think it's really time for them to blow this thing up. They should probably look to trade Sabonis. They should probably try to trade Levine. They should probably dump DeRozan for anything. You know, he's not going to be worth much on the open market, but embrace the youth movement. Let some of these other younger guys get some reps, bottom out. They have their own picks, so they don't have to worry about that, and make a run for one of these top 3 guys in the draft this year. I genuinely don't know why they wouldn't do that. You know, you look at some of these other teams, Phoenix does not have the luxury of doing that. New Orleans no longer has the luxury of doing that. Chicago, at least you can say, has a better shot of making the plan because of how weak the East is. Like Sacramento has a golden opportunity to bottom out, and they don't want to do it. So we'll see. Up next at number 23, we have the Toronto Raptors, who I think their roster, a lot like some of these teams in this tier, just like the Pelicans, like the Kings, they have some talent on the roster. They really do, especially when you look at the Eastern Conference and how bad it's going to be. And they, in theory, have a guy to build around, which a lot of these other teams don't have as well. Scotty Barnes, I know the approval rating on him took a little bit of a hit last year. He's kind of had a weird career where he was great his rookie season, ran away with Rookie of the Year and kind of a stacked rookie class. Then was a little bit disappointing, sophomore slump in his second year. Then third year, has another really, really good year, makes an all-star team, you know, averages just under 20 points a game, 6 assists, 8 rebounds, stat stuffer, good on the defensive end. And then last year, a little bit stagnated again. So he's kind of alternated good year, bad year, good year, bad year. So we'll see what happens this year. But I remain a big Scotty Barnes believer and defender. I think the fact that he got his max rookie extension, people were a little turned off by that because he obviously doesn't really project as the number one option on a good contending team, which I agree with. I don't think that is his destiny. I think he is one of those players that falls in the category of a superstar, do-it-all role player. But I mean a good enough version of that where he can be a perennial all-star. I think he is good enough to make an all-NBA team at some point in his career. He's not a natural go-to scorer. He probably never will be. So he's probably best suited as a secondary, if not tertiary, scoring option offensively, which obviously for this version of Toronto, he's going to have a lot of the scoring responsibilities. But I just mean that I do think that there's a world where he's sort of a hybrid of a Sean Marion, Andre Iguodala type that can just guard basically 1 through 4, if not 1 through 5. That can be a really big piece as an offensive playmaker, initiator, hub on that end of the court, as a guy that can run a lot of the offense with the ball in his hands and set guys up and get them the ball in their spots. He's a good rebounder for his size. He's great in transition, getting to the basket, and he's been mixed bag efficiency wise, but I think that's because he's been miscast as sort of a go-to option, like I mentioned. So I'm still very high on Scotty Barnes. I think that the deal they gave him made a ton of sense, just given the skill set that he does have. And I just wish we could see him in more of a overqualified role player type role, because I think that there's a place for him to have a real impact on a winning team. But for the purposes of the Raptors, he's obviously tasked with more responsibility there as a scorer, but at least they finally added someone that can take a little bit of the load off there in Brandon Ingram, trading for him at the deadline last season. Ingram is kind of another guy that I tend to lean a little higher on than consensus. I know that he has been majorly injury prone. 18 games last season, 64 the year before, 45, 55, 61, 62, 52, 59. Like, he has not consistently played enough games. Like, at the 65 game mark for awards, he's hit that one single time in his entire career, and it was his rookie year. So there's not a single season he would have technically qualified for a end of season award based on the amount of games he's played. So I understand all that. I understand the fact that he gets a little too mid-range happy, even though he is a good mid-range shooter, but he's a pretty good three-point shooter too. So he would be a much better, more efficient player if he just leaned into that part of his game a little bit more. I know that, when he's not involved on offense, he can check out a little bit. The defensive effort's not always there. But this guy is a walking 23, 5-5. And I just think that that's unique for a guy at his size, 6'8", 6'9", to be able to be a really good passer and playmaker that makes the right read when the defense collapses on that end of the court. A guy that can, with his wingspan and size, get his shot over basically anybody. He's looked dominant in certain settings. So the proof of concept of what Ingram can be, I'm bought in on. Like, I think he can be a guy that you run the offense through a little bit. And defensively, I think he needs to give some more effort. But those two as your top two, that's a lot of talent on the wing. But the problem with Toronto, again, a lot like a lot of these teams, the fit just doesn't make sense with a lot of the surrounding pieces. They've accumulated this group of very long, lanky guys that are big wingspan, that can be pretty good athletes, but aren't necessarily the most polished in terms of shooting and things like that. And guys that are skilled, but not in the prototypical way as a go-to scorer or a shooter from outside. And so RJ Barrett kind of fits that. Brandon Ingram kind of fits that. Scotty Barnes kind of fits that. Jonathan Mugbo, one of the rookies from last year, kind of fits that. Colin Murray Boyles, who they took in the first round this year, kind of fits that. Ochai Agbaji kind of fits that. So they just have a type, clearly, and they've just accumulated a bunch of versions of that same type. Obviously, not all those players are exactly the same, but you get the gist. Like, to build a team, you need your players and their skill sets to complement one another, not be overly redundant. And so there is a lot of redundancies here. And a lot of these guys need the ball in their hands to be their best version. Like Scotty Barnes, like I said, he's best when he's initiating the offense. He's not a guy that's going to be a good spot-up shooter. So having the ball out of his hands, not always the best idea. Brandon Ingram, like we said, can sometimes get disengaged a little bit when he doesn't have the ball for extended periods, even though he is a good spot-up shooter. So in theory, he could be a good off-ball player. But RJ Barrett, a guy who just has not shot the ball very well throughout his career, and a little ball stoppery, a little ball hoggy at times, can dribble the air out of the ball and can get to the basket and get downhill, but isn't always the best finisher there either. And then quickly, I think in theory, you're like, oh, well, that's a good fit because he can play off ball a little bit. But to me, he is underqualified to be a full-time starting point guard in the NBA. I just don't think he's got the skill set as a passer and playmaker. I think he can hold his own defensively. He can shoot decently well from outside, but he's inefficient across the board. And I keep coming back to this, but he's kind of the archetype of player that I've been talking about that's probably best suited for a six man, like he was in New York. I thought that was the best role for him. Toronto overpaid him, and that's the other part about the team. They are expensive as hell. If you just look at their top five guys in terms of how much they're making, Scotty Barnes, $39 million, Brandon Ingram, $38 million, Manuel Quickley, $33 million, RJ Barrett, $28 million, Jakob Poeltl, $20 million. That is a shit ton of money to invest in these guys that are, none of them are surefire all-stars every year. There's really only two of them that would have a puncher's chance to make one in any given year. And none of the players really fit that well together, like I mentioned. But I will say I do feel a little bit more optimistic about Toronto than some of these other teams, just in the sense that I think the East is really weak. If Brandon Ingram can put together a 65-game season, if Scotty Barnes can have one of his alternating years of being good happen this year, if Quickley can stay healthy, if Barrett, maybe they flip him for someone that's a better fit, or they end up starting Grady Dick who's more of a natural fit as a shooter, and Barrett can kind of run the second unit. They still have Pirtle, who's a good center. He is what he is. He's not as good defensively as he used to be, but still holds his own there. He's a good finisher near their basket, but not going to do much else. Makes the right play most of the time. There is a path for them, in my opinion, to be a playoff team. But again, the absolute ceiling on this team is probably like 44 wins. We want to call it 45, maybe. And even if they do win that, they're not making any noise come postseason time. So to me, they still are kind of stuck in no man's land. They have done the same thing that some of these other teams have done. They waited a little too long to trade Pascal Siakam. They waited a little bit too long to trade OG Anunoby. They let Fred VanVleet walk for absolutely nothing. And then they've made all these win now trades, like going for Brandon Ingram and giving him a fat extension, like trading first round picks for Agbaji, for Jakob Pertl, for Brandon Ingram. Like they clearly aren't overly invested in their young guys because they are willing to trade away these first round picks, but then they're not taking into account the feasibility of their core as a unit and how they fit together. And they have injury prone players. They have players that are just a little bit too redundant and need the ball in their hands. And we've seen this show before. So again, with Toronto, I feel a little bit more optimistic with them. I do like their coach. They did play really well defensively down the stretch of last season. So I think there's a chance they could sneak into the playoffs, but it's one of those like, to what end? Cool. You were the 8 seed and you lost first round to the Knicks or Cavs in 4 games. Now what? You just run it back and keep doing that 4 or 5 years in a row. So I don't know their direction. They've been a questionably run team over the past 5 years, really, since they won their championship. And so while there's more hope for them this season in terms of what their ceiling could be, their ceiling and their floor are just too close together. And that's not where you want to be as an NBA team, unless your ceiling is up there towards the contention tier, which they are clearly not a part of. And then the last team in this tier at number 21, we have the Miami Heat, who are a franchise that refuses to bottom out, which I think a lot of people have wanted them to do that. And I think they have at least earned the grace of hearing them out, because they probably should have bottomed out after Dwayne Wade and LeBron and that whole era. They kind of stayed in this weird area between relevant and not relevant, but then they make the splash of adding Jimmy Butler. They hit on the Tyler Hero draft pick. They hit on the Bam Adebayo draft pick. Dragic has a resurgent season, and suddenly they're in the NBA Finals. Not that long after that. And then it looked like that was maybe a fluke, and then they do it again 3 years later. And so I'm not totally in they should trade Tyler Hero, they should trade Bam Adebayo camp. But I'm kind of in the either do that or they need to be more aggressive in adding a star, because this team has everything you could want except the star player. Tyler Hero made the All-Star team last year, and I want to give him credit because he was significantly better last year than in years past. He had basically 3 straight years of being the exact same player, right around 20 points per game, 44% from the field, inefficient, not playing much defense, more of a secondary playmaker, 4 assists a game, fine. A guy that won 6th Man of the Year, and there was real questions about whether that was just his destiny as a player. But he took a significant leap last year, legitimately, 24 points a game, and that's not because his volume went up. He shot 17.5 field goal attempts in 2024 and only 17.9 last year. So only 0.4 more shot attempts per game. So it's not like he just started chucking, but his efficiency took a massive leap. 47% last year. His assists were way up by a full assist a game. And he was just a better player. He was making shots at a higher rate. He was making better decisions in the court. And so I thought he was worthy of the All-Star spot. And he has proven that he is more than what he had been over the past few seasons. With all that said, he is still certainly not a number one option on a tough playoff team. I still think he's best suited as a secondary complementary scoring option. And I think if you paired him with another 20, 25 point per game scorer, then it could be a really nice pairing. But I don't know if he's got it in him to be the number one guy on a team that has real aspirations to do anything or make any noise in the postseason. And then you've got Bam, who that he is legitimately an all-star talent, but mostly for what he does on the defensive end. He has shown some limitations offensively. He has tried to stretch the three-point shot out. Been mixed results. The percentages weren't awful last year, but it was lower volume still across the board, and it did hurt his efficiency. I think he probably needs to just bag the jump shot unless it's threes that are wide open, because he takes a little bit too many, pull up 18 footers for my liking. His touch around the basket is okay, not phenomenal, but he's a good hub offensively. He has a good feel for the game, good passer, moves the ball, good connector. And then obviously, like I said, what he does defensively is invaluable for this team. One of the best, most versatile defensive centers that we have in the NBA. So those two right there is a decent foundation. And then they've got good pieces around them. I mean, they pick up Norman Powell, who's coming off a career year. And I know Tyler Hero is going to be hurt to miss the beginning of the year, but he should be able to replicate some of what Hero does for them and then give them another reliable scorer and shooter, which they have kind of badly needed because their offense was just really a tough watch last season, especially with Jimmy Butler out of the picture. Andrew Wiggins, yeah, I have mixed feelings on him. I think that in the right role, he can be a good player, but the effort isn't always there, and he's inconsistent season to season with his shooting and defensive play. But overall, still a useful player, a guy that can contribute on a winning team. And then they do just have a lot of guys, a lot of professionals, a lot of guys that are going to be good rotation players for them and would be for any team. Davion Mitchell had a really good second half of the year with Miami down the stretch. The shot looked improved, and defensively he was just a game changer for them. Jaime Jaquez Jr. had a little bit of a down year last year, but obviously we saw in his rookie year that he can be very capable as a high contributor. They add Simone Fontecchio in place of Duncan Robinson, who not as good of a shooter, but arguably a comparable overall player because he's a better defensive player than Duncan Robinson and can do a little bit more with the ball. They brought back Precious Achiuwa, who has given underratedly decent minutes for the Knicks over the past few years, in my opinion. Khalil Ware, I really like. I think that he's got the makings of a high-level starting center in the NBA, guy that can stretch the floor, block shots, good finisher inside, has a lot of size and length as well. Nikola Jovic just got a rookie extension. He showed flashes last year as a strong stretch four, and then they draft Kasparis Yakuchonis in the first round, who I was personally very high on. So, look, they've got 10 to even 11 guys that I think are interesting, can get rotation minutes. They've got the defensive anchor in Bam, a perennial all-star caliber player. Tyler Hero, who made the all-star game last year, 20 to 25 point per game scorer. But they are just the one piece away to me. They're one piece away. They're the star away. And until they get that star, they are going to be kind of stuck in no man's land, which is why they're in this tier, because their ceiling is so capped. They made the finals twice over the last, 6 seasons? But they did that off the back of all NBA level play out of Jimmy Butler on the offensive end of the court. And they just don't have anybody on the roster who can be that level of player. And so, again, I'm not going to tell them they should absolutely blow it up. But if they don't blow it up, I really think they need to consider adding somebody to this roster. Feels like they've kind of lowballed some of the offers in the past, like the Kevin Durant saga this summer. Felt like they maybe could have pulled off the trigger if they'd included a Khalil Ware or something like that, but they held firm. And do I think they're winning the championship with Kevin Durant on this roster? Probably not. Do I think they're making the finals out of the East? Probably not. But at least they'd be in the conversation. And if something broke their way, then it's not out of the realm of possibility for them. Whereas right now, they're just going to be stuck in the play-in, maybe make the playoffs, just like they did last year. Probably get absolutely crushed in the first round, just like they did last year. And so I think Spoelstra gives this team a real floor. Any other team in this tier, if you told me they won 32 games, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I totally believe that. The Heat, I think their floor is higher. I think they're going to be minimum 35, probably up towards 40, if not 42, 43 this season, just because I think he's going to get the most out of the group. They do have two players that at least in theory could be all-star caliber guys. And then you added Norm Powell, Andrew Wiggins, a lot of the young guys I mentioned. They have some pieces, and the East is super weak. But they are a star away. And until they get that star, they are just going to be stuck in this middle ground. And I don't really know what their plan is other than just winning 43 games every season, winning a play-in game, and then getting bounced in the first round. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. I will have the next episode out over the next few days. That will include tiers 8 and tier 7 because some of the tiers are starting to get a little bit smaller. These were the two biggest tiers, so that's why they had only one tier dedicated to an episode. But the next couple ones have multiple tiers included in them. So we'll get into some more of the actual interesting teams that probably have a shot to make the playoffs or at least be not disappointing, ugly basketball, bottom of the standings, like the teams that we've talked about to this point. So with that said, thank you so much for listening, and I will chat with you soon.